I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. Kevin Knuth, a professor of physics at the University of Albany and editor of the peer-review open access journal Entropy. Kevin is also the lead scientist for UAPX, a contributing member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, an associate member of the Interdisciplinary Research Center for Extraterrestrial Studies, an affiliate of the Galileo Project, and serves on the board of advisors for the Society of UAP Studies. Kevin has published over 100 peer-reviewed publications and been invited to give over 100 presentations in 18 countries. Kevin joins us today to discuss a comprehensive new study on the UAP phenomena and offer insights into the claims of UAP whistleblower Jake Barber. And viewers, before I go any farther, please take just a moment to click the subscribe button and help our channel grow with the best content in UAP science, reverse engineering, and expert commentary. It costs nothing but means everything. Please just take a moment, click subscribe, do it right now. So Kevin, welcome back, sir. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you with me. This has been a big week in the UAP world.
It has. It's been a big season, the whole last fall. Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Great to see you.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much going on right now. So last night, News Nation debuted an exclusive interview by Ross Coulthart with helicopter pilot Jake Barber, who claims that he helped recover downed UAP on a government test range called The Range. So Barber is a decorated U.S. Air Force veteran and former member of an elite combat control unit, and he described recovering both egg and acorn-shaped UAP. So have you seen that interview yet, and what were your initial thoughts on it?
Well, I listened to the interview. I wasn't able to watch the video yet, so I didn't get to see the pictures. But I listened to it, and it's very interesting. It's exciting to have somebody else come forward, especially with firsthand knowledge. That's certainly compelling and exciting. So, yeah, and it takes a lot of courage to do that, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, and there was a lot that was kind of packed into it. But if you listen to it, you definitely got the gist of it. So the UAP egg is 20 feet long, no visible propulsion system or thermal signature. And to me, this is reminiscent of the propane tank UAP that was described during the Nimitz encounters. What interested me about this, kind of what caught my eye, was that shape strikes me as a great pressure vessel for operating across a range of different atmospheric densities as well as in the ocean. And it also seems like an optimal shape for a spacecraft that is using some kind of field effect propulsion. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, that's an interesting observation. You know, the fact that it's a good shape for being a pressure vessel. I think that's interesting. We've had a lot of the purported craft that have been witnessed and that have supposedly crashed are reported to be egg-shaped as well. So that seems to be a common shape. I think the craft that Lonnie and Zamora saw in Socorro, New Mexico was egg-shaped, if I remember.
It's interesting to see reports surface with some of these other shapes, right? Because, when you look in the news media, everybody likes to portray that classic flying saucer disc shape. And then, from the 90s on, it was black triangles. But there have been a wide variety of UAP shapes reported. Eggs were one of those. There was the classic cigar shape or the propane cylinder, and that goes way, way back. So It is interesting to see this variety, I guess, start to emerge.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can't help but wonder how they're different. I mean, why they're different, right? Are they just design differences? Are they functionally different? And do they work differently? Those are made by different peoples. Who knows? So there's a lot of interesting questions there.
Yeah, I know. Well, and we're starting out with just rampant speculation. I should frame that for the audience,
Right?
So Barber described the UAP acorn. This was the second shape that he described as being, I believe, a disc-shaped craft with 8 sections. He was looking from the top down. He said that it was separated into 8 sections. And during the recovery operation, he reported having a profound emotional experience that he described as psionic in nature, or psychic would be another word for it, I guess. What caught me about that is it was reminiscent of experiences described by many others in UAP encounters. They felt kind of a mental, emotional, or psychic connection to non-human intelligence. And so to have him come forward as a helicopter pilot, he said that that was profound enough that he described it as life-changing. So this was a deep experience. Do you have any thoughts on that from your research?
I mean, it's certainly what's reported by many people who come in close contact with these craft or close proximity to these objects. So it's interesting to hear him repeat similar experiences. As to what's going on, this is going to take a lot of study for us to figure out what's actually happening in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, it was intriguing. He also claimed that there is a psionics team utilizing people with special abilities who are able to summon UAP, and he further said that he sustained medical injuries consistent with radiation exposure. And I believe Dr. Garry Nolan reviewed his medical files. That was a part of the interview. And Nolan, if I remember correctly, he described it as something like out of a horror story. So what caught me about that was these are, again, consistent with the claims of other experiencers, right? Especially the radiation exposure. Not all of the time, but sometimes we do have that. And there are like cases in, like, I believe, Rendlesham Forest in England, where you had something that might have been radiation exposure that caused burns in the landscape, right? The trees and things like that, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you definitely, and wasn't it John Burroughs in the Rendlesham case that actually had medical problems because of this radiation, and his medical records were classified, and he won a settlement with the Air Force. So, so this is not, in many ways, none of this was new information for those of us who've been studying this topic for a long time. We've heard a lot of these similar stories, so this isn't that different. But it is important having somebody who's had first-hand contact and been involved in crash retrieval like this. That to have somebody come forward about that is really, really quite interesting and compelling.
It helps provide context, I think. So let's get into the paper, and this is truly exciting. It's called The New Science of Unidentified Aerospace-Undersea Phenomena. This is the result of a massive collaborative effort by 30 authors, weighing in at 157 pages with over 400 references.
It's now 168 pages.
Oh, so it keeps growing. Okay.
I had to make some edits last night, and actually I was up until about 5:30 a.m. finishing it. So it is now, I think, 168 pages long. It's a behemoth of a paper, and the biggest paper I've ever written. And it's kind of surprising for it to be going into a journal at this size. That's not typical either. So.
Well, and a lot of times people will send me, like you sent me a pre-pub of this, and a lot of times people will send me paper, and I can kind of go through and summarize and pull out key points. And in this one, it was like a detailed scientific history of ufology. I went through this, and I'm like, there's no way to quickly summarize this.
You can't quickly summarize it or write it or research it. This is occupied probably. I've worked pretty much only on this for about 9 months. Yeah, and so. Okay. Which is hard. My other colleagues on other scientific projects are, some of them have been despairing. Please, Kevin, stop working on this UFO stuff so you can come back and do normal science with us. But it basically came out of the idea was to produce a paper that describes what has been done to study UAP scientifically. So what scientific works, have been, so how has the scientific, the methodology of science been applied to study UAPs? And because it's often claimed that they haven't been studied scientifically and this work hasn't been done. And that's not quite true. And there are also claims, by skeptics. Well, there's no data. Nobody has any data. Nobody knows anything. This is all made up and nonsense. And this paper tries to dispel some of those myths by putting all of that information out there on what's actually been done to study these objects. We start basically in the early 1930s, like 1933 in Scandinavia, with ghost flyers, and we start there to highlight the fact that this did not start in 1947, like a lot of people say. Even ufologists will say things like that. This is much, much older, in fact, and in fact we have cases. Richard Dolan helped with this a great deal because he's writing a book on USOs right now, on unidentified submerged objects. And so he provided a couple cases for that section on unidentified submerged objects. So we have 3 cases we mentioned going back to 1845, balls of light coming out of the water in the Mediterranean near ships in 1845. And so none of this is new. And I think that's what the other thing we're trying to highlight is it's not American, which is, a lot of Europeans will claim that this is singularly an American phenomenon. It's not.
Yeah.
This is actually why we start in Scandinavia, to point that out. I've had people also claim that why aren't they ever seen in Africa? Right. Well, of course they're seen in Africa. Cynthia Hurd has a whole book called UFOs Over Africa where she goes into this. And my good friend and colleague Matthew Szydagis at UAlbany wrote a short summary paper arguing some of these points and making it clear that these criticisms aren't valid. They're criticisms raised by people who just haven't done their homework. So,
well, let me skip around my questions a little bit because you mentioned Scandinavia, and that caught my eye as well when I was going through it. Swedish Air Force General Pontus Roderswald published a statement that it, quote unquote, it could not be denied that a violation of our nation's airspace has been going on after his own Air Force denied the existence of UFOs back in 1934.
Right.
So less than a year later, he wrote that. So one thing that jumped out at me is this recurring cycle of reports, investigations, and denials by governments around the globe, right? And it happens again and again and again. It's a cycle. You have a slew of reports, you have major incidents, and people put pressure on the government to do an investigation, and then the government basically ends up sweeping it under the rug. And that has happened across multiple governments, including our own.
Nobody wants to do the investigation. I think it really comes down to that. Nobody really wants to be bothered to do something different, right, or hard, right? And this is not an easy problem. It's not an easy topic, and there's no easy resolution. And nobody wants to be tasked with this. Is my impression. And so, yeah, an investigation happens because somebody demands it, and so some guy in an office, great, I have to investigate these crazy people who see these lights in the sky, and they don't really want to do it, so it's a half-hearted attempt, and it gets swept under the rug and denied. And I think that's why it keeps happening. And we even saw that with Arrow, with Kirkpatrick.
Yeah.
I mean, the Arrow report was, I don't remember how many pages. What was 11 pages or something? It was very little. The Cometa report that the French did in 1999 was more than 100 pages. Why are the French in 1999 producing a report that's literally 10 times longer than the report that Arrow does for the Pentagon? There's something wrong here, and hopefully the new Arrow director seems to be more interested and enthusiastic about the topic, and I hope we'll do.
Well, and I think the takeaway for Arrow and the DoD and Congress is this is not going away. For 150 plus years, it has been a recurring cycle of reports, investigations, and denials. So this is not a phenomenon that is just going to disappear.
Yeah, don't
try to
pushing it under the rug's only going to make it come back later bigger. Because and this is what you saw this fall with the drone activity. The drone activity, because we've brushed it under the rug and haven't studied it, because the public hasn't been made aware of what the truth is or what these objects are, if they've learned anything at all. And we're now in a state of ignorance, which is a dangerous state to be in. You don't want to be in a state of ignorance. And then, this fall we had a problem. We have these objects appearing over military bases, not just in New Jersey, which kind of surprises me that we always focus on New Jersey. It's heavily populated. Yeah, there's a lot of sightings there, but this was happening all over the world. As far as I was aware, it was about 17 countries this was happening in. And
so the drone sightings, then, let me ask about that. I actually had that in my questions and I took that out, but let me ask about that.
All over your question sheet.
Oh, no, that is, you know what? That's totally cool. We'll play fast and loose today. So the New Jersey drone sightings, I did stories on that. It seems like there's kind of a bifurcation. People who are following the UAP phenomenon have identified a lot of specific aspects of it that they say do not match human technology, right? Whereas people in the defense community tend to think that it might be foreign adversaries. But as you mentioned, like I'd identified, I think 35 something different sites, and it's continued to grow since then. You'd mentioned 17 different countries. Do you think the New Jersey drones were some kind of an NHI UAP phenomena?
I don't know what they are, and I don't think anyone knows because it really hasn't been studied yet. This is part of the problem. You can't know what they are until you go study them and try to collect data on them. Based on some of the reports, based on a lot of the images I saw, a lot of those were airplanes or helicopters, and probably, traditionally 95% of UFO sightings are misidentifications, and so that statistic is probably going to remain the same for these drone sightings. So, when we're worried about these objects, it's the 5% that you care about, not the 95%. So yeah, most of them are probably airplanes, probably helicopters or drones, and people out flying. People are seeing drones. Time to take my drone up, right? you surely had that happening in some cases. So. But some of these objects weren't, clearly were different. And in fact, I was struck by the sightings off northern Oregon near Seattle on the Washington-Oregon coast, where you had pilots seeing balls of light approach their planes and then speed off at supersonic speeds and things like this. Those are clearly different types of phenomena. So that what I would classify as an interesting UAP.
Yeah, so it requires more study, but I think what you're saying is there's more going on there than meets the eye. It's not just quadcopters. That's kind of my takeaway from that.
They're not just quadcopters. It's not that simple. And of course the military's first go-to is going to be it's a foreign adversary, because that's what they are paid to worry about, right? So that's going to be their go-to. But it isn't until you study things more carefully, and then you can start to tease apart, what is actually happening here. And
well, so going back to the paper again, all-star list of contributors, over 30 contributing authors. You mentioned Richard Dolan, as well as Jacques Vallee, Garry Nolan, Mark Rodeghier from CISU, and a number of up-and-coming subject matter experts like Beatriz, Villarroel, and Matthew Szydagis.
Yeah, and Hakan Kayal is there too, and some of the French researchers, Luc Denis and Baptiste Friscourt. Yeah, that happened kind of organically and out of necessity. So the paper started out as it actually originated from the paper that Matthew Szydagis was first authoring for our UAPX team. So we had written up a paper describing the UAPX mission in Catalina, and Matthew Szydagis took the lead on that paper. And the the editor-in-chief of the journal we were submitting it to wanted a section on the scientific study of UAP. And basically a quick summary. He wanted a summary, not a quick. He didn't say quick. He said he wanted a summary of the scientific study of UAP. So Matthew was busy working on the rest of the paper and asked if I could take that on, and I said, sure, I can write up something. And I started writing, and before I knew it, I had 15 pages of text, right? And I thought, wow, this is actually really interesting. There's a lot here, and I'm not sure where to stop. and so I tried to stop. I gave Matthew what I had, and we tried to figure out how to fit it into our UAPX paper. And it didn't fit in the paper. It doesn't belong there, right? The UAPX paper is about our UAPX mission. So Matthew suggested maybe we propose to the editor to just submit this as a separate paper. And the editor liked that idea, and so I kept working on it, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And at one point, I think it was when I was trying to summarize the work being done by some of the other scientists who are currently looking at UAPs, right? So you mentioned Beatriz Villarroel and the Vasco project, Hakan Kayal with IFEX, and then you've got the Galileo project, you've got the other efforts in SCU and the other efforts going on, and I thought, well, I don't really want to. It was going to take a lot of work for me to summarize each of these efforts, right? And we're all busy, so we're doing lots of things.
So you just group it together.
And so what I did, what Matthew suggested, why don't you just contact those people and see if they can write up their sections? That way, what they want to have published about their project gets published, and you don't make any mistakes or upset anybody. Nobody can come back at me and say, "Oh, you forgot to mention this," or you mischaracterized this effort. I didn't want that to happen, so I contacted these people, and they were, where we all know each other and collaborate anyway. We share information all the time. This is what scientists do. So they happily wrote up their sections and helped review the manuscript as well. And so the author list just kept growing this way. And I pretty much handled the U.S. government section. I got a good bit of help from Robert Powell and Rich Hoffman from SCU. And then I was working a lot from Michael Sword's book on governments and UFOs. So I then thought, well, and I got a little stuck in some points and thought, well, I'm just going to contact Michael Swords, and of course he helped me write some of that sections as well. And it just kept growing this way. And then I thought, well, now I really should handle the French. The French have done a crazy amount of work for much longer. And I thought, but I'm not equipped to evaluate what the French have done. I don't know what the history is. And so I contacted Baptiste Friscourt and Luc Denis, and they helped out, writing some sections. And then we got Mike Valiant and Thibault Knuth joined as well. So, and I just kept getting help from people. These are all the people we know, and it just kept exploding. And of course I was like, is this really a good idea? Am I really messing this up, or am I doing a good job, or am I just way overboard? And I suspect I'm hoping that I had just enough crazy in me to take on something like this and let it explode, but not too much crazy that it didn't really get out of control. And so it seems like I might have actually pulled this off. We'll see.
That's absolutely amazing.
Looking the paper over today, last night I was very happy with it. So I added some work on UFOs and nuclear weapons, and expanded on that a good bit, including some of the work that was done by Larry Hancock and Ian Porritt and Sean Grosvenor and Larry Cates at SCU. They had done 3 nice studies on the history of UFOs and nuclear production sites, and I included a good bit of that information because I thought that was valuable as well.
So before I go farther, where can people read this? When can they get a copy of
When?
this?
That's a good question. First, I have to submit it to the journal, which will happen when I hang up with you, actually. I need to send this thing off and try to be done with it because I think I'm at the end. The last thing I added last night at about 5 in the morning was I noticed that Canada had released the preliminary report from their new program called Skywatch. And I thought, well, this paper's never going to end because people keep doing things. And I thought, well, but I didn't have much on Canada in the paper already. I only had a little bit on Project Magnet. And so I thought, well, all right, we'll do a favor of the Canadians and put this in. So I wrote up a few paragraphs on Skywatch and then.
So it's going in for publication. Now my thought is in the future, this should be available on the SCU website,
Yeah,
right?
so that's what I expect. So we will be able to. I'm going to try to submit it to the archive, which is where our physics papers typically go. Whether they'll accept it or not, I don't know. They accepted our UAPX paper, which was pretty amazing.
Okay.
But they didn't accept my flight characteristics paper. They rejected that. I could try again, but I don't necessarily want to because after I had that rejection, I had several other theoretical physics papers just delayed for 9 months where they were. I think that I was probably red flagged as being a possible crazy person, and they were being extra careful with my other papers. So it's a risky. But I think, but certainly, there's several of the co-authors are from SCU, and I'm sure that they'd be happy to put it up on their site, and I'll have it on my personal website as well.
So for anybody who is not familiar with that, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, which you have been a member of, just driving that forward, people can learn more about that at explorescu.org. And I would also urge
we'll probably put it on our UAPX site as well, with our UAPX paper, yeah.
Yeah, and so also UAPX, I will put links in the show notes to both of those. Again, I want to remind anybody watching to please subscribe to this channel, help train the algorithm, help get us promoted, right? And the part of the reason there is, one of the reasons I love doing interviews with you is UAP science is different than UAP drama, right? There are stories that come and go. There is a narrative in the press that comes and goes, and it seems to come and go in cycles. But you are doing real science, and that's what I'm trying to cover on this channel.
It's much more
that's
boring
why I'm pushing for subscribers.
than it is the other stuff. It's a lot of hard work, and it takes a long time. But
it does, so I'm going to out myself here. I am participating in a study of arts parts. You're familiar with that. I'm working on that with Matthew Szydagis, as well as a fellow named Jared Yates and some of the folks from the APEC conference. And what reminded me, when you were talking about this report growing, we have the same problem. We started with one fragment of arts parts. We did SEM, XRD, and microscopy on it. And, then we have since analyzed 3 more pieces of arts parts, 2 pieces of the St. Augustine crash, and we have, I think, 4 or 5 more people contacting us with credible fragments that they want us to analyze. So it's the same thing. It's once you get started, right? You go down that rabbit hole, it just grows and grows and grows. So...
yeah, it's fantastic. And I know Matthew's been working on that. He's been very excited about some of his results. So it'll be great to see how that all gets put together.
Well, so I want to get into key findings in this paper. One of the things that you've talked about in the past is Hermann Oberth and others discussing UAPs exceeding Mach 55 and demonstrating spacecraft-like performance. And in fact, one of the things that you had talked about in past interviews is this performance from UAPs is consistent with interstellar propulsion. So has this study reinforced the performance data or the 5 observables?
Not exactly. This paper is more of a review paper of what's been done to study UFOs scientifically. So it doesn't contain new information about UAPs in particular. I mentioned Hermann Oberth's work and in the paper briefly, and point out that it's been known since his his speech on UFOs was 1954. So it was known in 1954 that these things would travel at speeds of 40,000 miles an hour, which is what, three and a half times faster than this space station moves around the Earth, right? So things are moving at spacecraft speeds, and that's been known since the 50s. And so in some way, it's kind of silly to hear people say, well, there's no evidence that these things are spacecraft, right? This has been known since the 50s, and our government's known this, and Germans have known it, and so it's time to stop pretending and let's get down to business and try to study these things.
Well, and this isn't in my questions. In fact, I wrote this down and thought, I probably shouldn't mention it. But one of the things that Jake Barber mentioned yesterday, very briefly, was a UAP emerging from a ridge. Now, that could mean a lot of different things, right? It could be that it's just coming through a gap in rock, But it reminded me of other reports that I have seen, and they're not well publicized, suggesting that UAP can at least sometimes pass through solid objects. And that took me back to this transverse medium travel, right? Where they can definitely
the transmedium travel issues. Yeah, this is a question I've asked ufologists who know cases better than I do. I've asked, have these things ever been observed going into the earth, into the ground, into mountains, into cliffs? Has that ever happened? And apparently there's a few cases where this has happened, where this has been reported. I mean, it comes down to one of the surprising things about the speeds of these objects in air is that there are no sonic booms, there are no fireballs, and in fact, Avi Loeb and Kirkpatrick from Aero wrote a paper on how if you're moving at these speeds, there ought to be fireballs and there ought to be sonic booms, and they're absolutely right. So the question is, why do these objects not make sonic booms or fireballs? None of this it's never reported. They're silent and moving at supersonic speeds. So this is commonly reported. So the question is how? How do you explain this? And so you would expect that it sounds like the UAP is not interacting with the air, right?
Yeah.
You've got to shove all the air out of the way as you travel through it, right? That air has to go somewhere, and that's at those speeds it's a violent process. And the same thing happens with USOs, underwater objects. The case that I know about from New Zealand, they had a large submarine-shaped object, 800 feet long, 150 feet wide, that closed something like 2.5 kilometers in 25 seconds. You've got to take a 150-foot wide column of water that's 2.5 kilometers long and shove it out of the way in 25 seconds. That has to do something. That water has to go somewhere, right? All the fish and dolphins and things in between have to go somewhere. But apparently it doesn't. So then there's the mystery. Yeah, that's a physics anomaly. Or can you explain that with good engineering, or does it require some new physics? That's yet unanswered. But the interesting thing, especially with the underwater case, is that it acts as if it's not interacting with the water, yet they're detecting it on sonar. And the way sonar works is you send send sound waves through the water. Water's a dense medium. It's incompressible, so they're pressure waves, not displacement waves. So you've got pressure waves happen by the atoms banging on the object and then bouncing off again and then sending the pressure wave back. That's how sonar works. And so you can only detect something with sonar if the water is interacting with it. So the fact that they can detect it with sonar means it has to be interacting with the water, but the fact that they're barreling through the water at about 3,000 miles an hour means they can't be interacting with the water. So how do you put those two together? That's not
there
obvious.
Are a couple of possibilities too. So again, going back to a conference a few days ago, Jacques Vallee had mentioned this may or may not be true, right? But he had repeated a story about one of the Corso samples, and he said, I believe it was a fellow named Don Rich, put a flame on that, and the flame deflected from it. And what interested me about that was, according to Sarfati, this was some kind of a force field, or he described it as kind of an anti-gravitational field, something along those lines. That caught me in terms of ablation, right? Because if you're going at Mach 55 through the atmosphere, you're going to have some kind of a field or something to protect these craft. Not only would you have fireballs, but I mean, it would just, the hull erosion would just destroy the craft instantly, right? So there's part of it, it could be they have some kind of a field. Sarfati believes that it's basically a variant on the Alcubierre warp drive. But then another aspect of that is I have read about UFOs, quote unquote, phasing out. And that's what the Ridge comment from Jake Barber reminded me of. I thought, is this an example of UFOs somehow phasing partway out so they can travel through these different materials without interfering with them at all?
Yeah, well, those are all interesting hypotheses. The force field hypothesis would explain, why, would certainly protect a hull, but it still means you've got to shove all that water out of the way, or shove all the air out of the way. The force field would be shoving it out of the way, not the hull. So you still have the same problem with sonic booms not existing, or no apparent interaction with the water, yet you can still get sonar. So that's very confusing. But how would something like a warp bubble, like an Alcubierre drive, interact with the medium? I don't think that's really been studied. I don't know anybody who's ever published a theoretical paper describing what a warp bubble in air does to the air around it, right?
I don't think anyone's ever thought of it.
Yeah.
I think
I know a few people have we've talked about it a bit. The physicists, we've talked about it, but none of us have actually done it. So there's a lot to do. I just finished this paper, so I've had to put things put a lot on hold. Yeah,
well, there's so much going on. So one of the things that you've got to do in the next few days is watch that video. They do have a video. I'm sure that it's all over the internet now. Yeah, you sent a clip
to Matthew, and either you CC'd me or he did. I don't remember which, but thank you.
That's great. It is. Yeah, I swear to God, it is a. I mean, again, there are no seams. There's no propulsion system. There are no protrusions. It literally looks like an enormous egg that is basically suspended from, I think it was a 150-foot long line from this helicopter. And I'm going to upset people by saying this, but my first thought when I saw that was Mork and Mindy. Right?
That was my first thought too. Mork from Mork, right? He lands, he crash lands in the egg. That's exactly what I thought too. Well, we're the same age, I think, so it's...
Yeah, it's a giant egg, right? Yeah. It's a giant egg. I'm like, wait, so Robin Williams is going to bust out of it?
Robin Williams is going to come out of that thing. That's right. That's what happened to him. Yeah.
Yeah. So this, it is an interesting and strange story. There is so much going on there. So one thing I did want to touch on was Aero, right? I wanted to ask. I mean, this is a fully funded government organization that is tasked with investigating this phenomena, and yet, from what I understand, they didn't contribute to this report. They're not promoting this report. They kind of do little reports of their own every now and then, but they aren't really tackling the issue like you are. You are driving forward a massive non-governmental effort here. Should they be participating in this?
No, absolutely not. I think this is a scientific effort. We are independent from governments. The scientists interact globally. So this isn't government-based, and it's a good thing that it's not, because we can collect our own data and make our own inferences and share data with each other, whereas anybody from the government, you're getting data that's probably been classified to some degree. The instruments that were used to collect it are classified typically, so you don't know what the instruments are. You don't have access to the instruments to be able to calibrate them, make sure they were calibrated properly. You don't have access to be able to test them, to be able to look for failure modes. The military isn't going to tell you what the failure modes of their FLIR cameras are, right? You're exposing weakness. They can't do that. and I understand that, but you need to know what the failure modes are so that you can tell that the object wasn't malfunctioning, right? And or the equipment wasn't malfunctioning in some way. And we've had equipment malfunction. When we were on Catalina, we had FLIR. Two of our, at least one of our FLIR cameras was malfunctioning. We had it looked like objects were falling into the sea at one point, and it took us a good bit of research with the companies that made the equipment to be able to figure out what was going on. And it turned out that was an artifact from a malfunctioning camera, and so so you need all of that information to be able to evaluate what's going on. So in a lot of ways, we can't. Information and data from the government, any government, isn't trustworthy, because we don't have access to the equipment. We don't know what the equipment was. We don't know what the conditions were under which the data was collected. It's not being collected under controlled conditions. It's usually being collected on the fly, and which is less than ideal. And then on top of it, to make matters even worse, is we know that they've been covering things up and lying about things for 80 years. So even if Aero came out tomorrow or this afternoon yet and said, yeah, there are aliens and we captured 30 craft and this is where they were captured, I'm not sure I would believe it.
Well, that takes me into public trust in government. And this goes back to the official denials, right? This cycle of, reports, investigations, and denials. And I think that is kind of the consistent theme of our talk today. But according to Pew Research, in 2024, only 22% of Americans say they trust the government in Washington to do what is quote unquote right most of the time. Not even all the time, but like they're making an effort, right? Like we're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Only 22% of Americans believe that. And believe it or not, that is up. Last time I looked, it was like 17%. So do you think UAP secrecy and again, this drama, this game, this runaround that's been happening, does that contribute to low trust in government?
It certainly
overall?
does. Yeah, it certainly does. And what message would I have for those people in government? If you care about our country, you're going to want to be honest. Don't lie. Yeah. Be honest. Don't cover things up. Don't conceal things. Be honest with the people who you are protecting and serving. When you don't lie. I mean, it's just everybody's mother told them not to do that. So I don't know why it happens.
This is just my opinion, but I look at it as kind of a combination of two things. Part of it is definitely like not my problem, right? I'm going to pass this along to the next guy, and
I don't want to deal
with it because I don't want to deal with this.
Yeah.
And then I think the other part is, and I think some people may have difficulty, visualizing this, but even if Aero has something like 50, staff, I think that was the number that I'd heard. Even if they have several $1 million in budget, that does not go very far in terms of investigating.
No, not at all. Yeah.
So they are,
they've got
understaffed,
they're being tasked with an almost impossible job, and they certainly 50 people isn't going to be enough, and you don't want 50 people who are all in the same group, not interacting with anybody else. The thing that makes scientists so powerful is that we interact with each other and we criticize each other's work. We have and well, if you watch Nat Geo's Leslie Kane's UFOs Investigating the Unknown, right, which is out right now on Hulu, I guess it is. And episode 3 is the episode on scientists. So I'm in there, and I'm followed by Adam Frank from the University of Rochester is in there as well, and he mentions that the important thing is standards of evidence. And in science, we have standards of evidence. And yes, it is probably the most boring topic that you could have in science. And then here we go, scientists taking away all the fun again. But it's important. I mean, you need standards of evidence, and you need to hold each other to those standards, right? And I've had, conversations with a lot of other scientists who've studied this topic, and we're often reining each other in, saying, well, you can't jump to this conclusion. You don't have enough evidence for this conclusion yet. You don't know that they're craft. Don't call them craft, you call them objects. We don't. So we do that with each other all the time. And you worry about a group like Aero, who is being influenced by the Pentagon, and they're trying to make a lot of people happy at the same time, which is going to lead, you're going to end up with everybody unhappy. And so it's an impossible job.
My thought there is, I would love to see them work with organizations and be able to say, like the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies or the Soul Foundation or X, Y, and Z are doing great work. You should check out this or that report. That costs them nothing. I think any of
us would be happy to work with them and help them. And so I don't know anybody who would just say, no, we're not working with them. That's not how scientists operate either. And so, yeah, if they want to really study the topic, interact with us. Let's all share information and share ideas and get to the bottom of this.
Well, and so not only Aero, but the people watching this right now, and again, I'm going to push them hard to subscribe, right? UFO Science, smash that like button, smash the subscribe button. I hate that phrase, but I'll steal it for today. But my thought was, people don't watch UAP podcasts for entertainment. They watch them because they want answers and they are willing to get involved, right? This is not a passive thing. This is something that everybody can contribute to. So I think what's missing is a clear, concise call to action. What can people do who are watching right now to help move disclosure forward and help your work?
Yeah, I think that a few things. One is contact your representatives, both in the Senate and the House, federally, and push them to allocate federal funding for UAP studies. That would be incredibly helpful. NASA was supposed to do something like this and hasn't yet, but that would be great for us to be able to apply for grants from the federal government to study these objects. That would be great. And I hate saying this too, you can also donate money. You can donate money to my group, UAPX, and there are several other good groups to donate to as well. And although I'd prefer you donate to UAPX, of course. And because it takes money to get good equipment, it takes money to test it, to calibrate it, to go out into the field and take data. And you have to pay people to help you. You can't carry all that equipment yourself and set it up all yourself. And in fact, just to highlight how desperately we need this, is I got a nice honorarium for an event that I went to at Wellesley College, hosted by Wes Waters, who works on the Galileo project. And I was thinking, well, I could use some of this money to, of course I can pay off some of my credit card debt and put some of it into savings, but I could really use some of this money to buy a new magnetometer. We could really use a nice Fluxgate magnetometer. And so I was looking at them and found, well, this one's like $2,000, this one's like $800, how much, so we're really, a lot of us in the sciences are those of us groups who don't have $1 million donors, which there aren't, that doesn't happen often, and we certainly don't at UAPX. We're many times using our own money buying equipment, and that's we're trying to get the job done, and we're doing everything we can to get the job done, but that's sometimes what it takes. And
it's bit by bit and piece by piece. And again, going back to the arts parts thing, what I see is a lot of people in universities and educational institutions who are trying to work together and share resources as best they can.
Yeah, we often do that. Yeah, that's definitely true. We had some parts from Colin Andrews, which were from the San Agustin planes crash, and and we couldn't do mass spectroscopy on it at the time because it was during COVID and our equipment was shut down in our university, and so we ended up going to Caltech and worked with a professor there who analyzed that on his equipment for free. I mean, he just did it on his spare time, right? And we didn't get charged for it, and we got results. So we do that a lot as well.
Well, and then another thing that I want to recommend to the audience is, whistleblowers like David Grush or, last night's interview with Jake Barber. I think that there's a lot of value. I think that whistleblower revelations like that are important and they captivate the imagination, but people should not neglect existing sources as well. Your study is a perfect example of this. There is a history of sightings, reports, and evidence that dates back, again, over 150 years. And as we learn more about this phenomena, we can recontextualize what some of that older data means, right?
Oh, that's definitely true. Yeah, some of these older cases allow you to rule out certain hypotheses, especially. And this is especially why I, on purpose, included underwater cases or transmedium cases from the 1800s, because they're not Chinese balloons. They're clearly not Chinese balloons. They're not Russian. They're not American. They are something totally different, right? And when you see these cases and read about them, you realize they're seeing the same things that back in the 1800s that are being seen today. They're the same things, clearly. And in fact, one of the cases I put in was a strange one where was Mary Kingsley. She was an explorer in the late 1800s, in the 1890s, and she was exploring, having a woman explore from London in West Africa by herself in the 1890s. So picture that. Picture everything you might worry about and then multiply it by 10, right? So she's exploring the Congo Basin in the 1890s, and she's in this one case she has a canoe. She's collecting species of fish. She has several species of fish that were named after her, that she made Western science aware of, and in one event she had gotten out of her canoe and was washing up, and in the evening and saw a violet ball, size of an orange, glowing violet ball came flying out of the bushes and then headed out across the river to the other bank, over the beach on the other bank of the other side of the river. And as it approached that bank, another violet ball came out of the bushes there, and the two kind of cavorted with each other on the beach. And she thought that they were a new kind of luminous insect. So she got in the canoe and she paddles across the river. At night in Congo, see, there's Nile crocodiles out there. There's hippos. This is dangerous, right? So you've got a woman from a very brave woman from London paddling across this river to go look at these balls of light, right? And as she approaches them on the beach, she gets to the beach. She gets out and tries to approach them, and one of them zips off into the. They evade her, right? So one zips off into the bushes, the other one heads out over the river. So she gets back in her canoe and she chases this one on the river. And just as she's about to catch it, the thing dives into the water and then descends into the depths underwater. And she could see the violet glow underwater. And that was the end of the encounter. But
that's orbs, right?
That's some kind of what we would call orbs, right? But it's
orbs.
But they're very different than an egg-shaped craft, right? This is a very different type of thing. And UAPs aren't just one thing. There are multiple phenomena here that we're studying. And so that was in 1893 that happened. And she wrote that up in her journal, and it's in her book. And so I put that in the paper. But I also found that there's a case in Killeen Atomic Stockpile, Killeen National Atomic Stockpile in Texas. In 1949, there were two patrolmen and a violet glowing ball about 4 inches across, about the same size, came flying past them, actually flew up to them and flew around their feet, about 10 feet away from them, for for a minute or so, and then flew up into the trees and took off. But this was a blinking violet orb. And soon after that happened, several other orbs appeared that other patrolmen saw, and that went on for a few days apparently there. And so I included that case too. But it's interesting that these things have been seen for centuries. I mean, none of this is new.
This goes back to your Drake equation rework, right? And we talked about this in a past interview. But one of the things that came out of your hypothesis was that if ET arrived here based on your estimates, it could have been something like 400,000 years ago, right? So
it could be, yeah. Well, my estimates were like 1.17 million years ago, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that adds so much. I guess again, for me, it inspires the imagination. But like, people watch Ancient Aliens and they look at, hieroglyphs and the pyramids and like, is this a UFO? And now it's like, well, maybe it is,
Yeah. These things have been seen for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're not all Chinese weather balloons, as much as we would like to think that.
Now, do you have any insights into the variety of shapes and sizes? Again, we were talking about orbs a moment ago. We've talked about eggs, cigars. There's the classic disc-shaped saucer.
I think SCU has a publication on shapes and sizes. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I think that they've done some work on shapes and sizes. But there's a good bit that could be done, yes.
And it tends to come and go in waves.
These aren't all the same types of things either, and they're maybe not all. They very probably aren't all alien spacecraft either, right? So some of them could be other kinds of phenomena. Are they like the Hestelin lights? Are those atmospheric phenomena? Are they plasma balls? Are they what? Who knows what they are? There's a lot to learn here, and there's a lot of opportunity for learning something interesting about the world around us, and I would love to see more scientists excited and involved with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to say the word swamp gas because I will get lynched by my viewers.
You would be lynched.
Not swamp. It's anything except swamp gas.
We talk about that in the paper too. It was because that was Hynek who said that, right?
Yeah,
it was J. Allen Hynek who said that, and then really pissed off Gerald Ford. So it was a mess. And so, we talked about that in the paper
gas
too
doesn't
as well.
leave impact craters. What's the deal with that? So,
somebody once said to me swamp gas, and I said, have you ever seen swamp gas? Do you know what swamp gas looks like? And they're like, no, I've never seen. Do you know anyone who's seen swamp gas? No. In fact, I know more people who have seen UFOs than I know who have seen swamp gas. So that says something right there, right?
Yeah, swamp gas is pretty rare, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, but
and it's really only luminous if it's on fire, right? Which is then a different problem. So,
yeah, so it's anything except swamp gas. But we do have, again, triangles, saucers, cigar shapes, eggs, orbs. We have a lot of variety, a lot of shapes, sizes, a lot of performance characteristics, and it tends to come and go in waves, right? Like again, in the 90s, it was black triangles. Black triangles were everywhere.
Yeah, not all of them, but some of them do. Yeah, we have a lot to learn, and I would love to fast forward to find out what the answers are to some of these questions.
Absolutely. Well, Kevin, on that note, let me thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to ask the audience once again to subscribe as well as visit explorescu.org. Yes, subscribe to my channel. Help me grow. For the love of God, please. But then also the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, and there's a conference coming up. I am planning on going to that. I know that you participate in that.
Yeah, I always go, so yep.
UAPX, they need to learn more about UAPX and get involved there. So we've got a lot of things. This is audience participation time, right? But I want to close by asking, what is coming up next for you after you submit this massive report to the journal? And what do you see happening in UAP over the next few months, if anything?
Oh, two really hard questions. What am I doing next? I probably will do work on my exoplanet work that I have a NASA grant to work on. So the NASA folks are going to want to see me actually have more results, because I have been doing what I'm supposed to, but yeah, I've been distracted by this paper. That's really true. So I probably would be doing some catch-up work in my exoplanet work. As for UAPs, I'm not quite sure yet. I have a few options, and one of the ideas is to. One of the things that makes this topic hard is that it's sometimes so strange that it really can break your worldview to accept some of these phenomena. And so it helps to form bridges to help people do this. So my work on galactic colonization is one of those papers that helps form a bridge where you look at that and realize, yeah, okay, that's not unreasonable. You could have galactic colonization to some degree. And so another question that comes up, surprisingly, I don't understand this actually, but a lot of scientists will say, why visit Earth? Why would you bother to visit Earth? And that I'm always stunned by that question, because my first thought is, we spend how much money to go to Mars, and there's not much there, right? Earth is, compare Earth and Mars. Earth is fantastic. Earth is amazing. And I tell my students in my astronomy class when we're talking about astrobiology, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting something that's alive on Earth. I mean, Earth is fantastic. Why wouldn't you visit Earth? And why would aliens study Earth? Well, humans study Earth. Lots of humans study Earth. Biologists study Earth. Geologists study Earth. An alien would certainly want to study Earth. But there's other reasons to visit Earth too. So it's always a little surprising when you hear a scientist say, "Why would you bother visiting Earth?" Why do you bother going outside? I don't know how to respond to that. So I've been working on a paper called "Why Visit Earth," and have a good number of reasons to visit Earth, and so that's another one. Why is Earth interesting? Some people apparently need to be told why Earth is interesting, so I'm going to try to do that at some point.
Wonderful. Kevin, thank you again so much for your time today, sir.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great pleasure.